Hey everyone, welcome back to the Layback Podcast. Joining us today is an incredibly special guest, Gary McCoy. Gary is a celebrity in my eyes, in the Flex Pro Grip team's eyes. We're going to try to make him blush up front. Don't know if we'll be able to do it, but he is sporting his patented blacked out outfit with the black and white background. This is so standard. It makes me feel at home on a Zoom call with him, seeing this on the other side. Gary is a staple in the high performance side of baseball. He's done some really incredible things. I am going to bury the lead right now and let him talk a little bit more about it later on. But he's currently involved in some consulting. He's always kind of on these CIA, FBI-esque missions in the background of the baseball and the sports performance world. So maybe we'll poke and prod and get some things out of him as we go. But Gary, thanks a ton for coming on. I tried not to butcher anything in the process, so hopefully you can take this off of my hands and tell everyone a bit about who you are.
Yeah, thank you, Adam, and it's an honor to be here. Anytime I join a podcast or get the opportunity to share a little bit of the journey that I've been on here, it's always a pleasure. So entirely mine, and yeah. So look, it's been a really interesting ride for me. The accent your listeners are picking up on is Australian, and probably the first thought is, "Oh, damn it, another sports scientist from Australia," right? That's you got an Australian accent, you must be a sports scientist. Grew up in a sports science environment, which was totally different from that is kind of preached over in the United States. Is preached here is more around strength and conditioning. Those were the models that were primary. And look, sports science in Australia, growing up in that, why was it prevalent there? Well, in 1976, Australia didn't medal at the Montreal Olympic Games. We didn't medal. Wasn't a single medal. So the Australian government turned around and said, you know what we need to do? Don't worry about curing cancer. Don't worry about this massive hole in the ozone layer. Don't worry about anything environmentally. We need gold medals. So we set up this thing in 76 called the Australian Institute of Sport, and it really became where we put scientists. We put the best scientists we could find in the country to try to figure this out. And fast forward, within 8 years, Australia's the highest per capita gold medals winner across the Olympic Games. So at that level, so I knew coming into the United States when I first moved here that, I did have a different background. It was broader than just strength and conditioning. So worked for two organizations in baseball, and it was right after the 2006 World Baseball Classic. We were the only team that didn't have an injury, Team Australia. We didn't have an injury. And that prompted a lot of thought because there was a lot of fear around WBC at the time because it was at the start of the baseball season. And what if I lose 100 million? What if Shohei Ohtani goes down playing for Japan in the WBC? The Dodgers are going, oh my God, right? They're tearing their hair out. So the fact that we had no injuries, everyone was like, what did you do different? Well, we had very specific recovery protocols that we were putting in place that I think helped enhance this. And we were also kind of monitoring load without knowing what that even meant back at that time. So yeah, went to work then for the Florida Marlins, was a AAA and up and down in the major leagues with them, recruited over to the Houston Astros in 2010. 3 years with the Astros. We had a massive ownership change, a lot of changes going on in the organization. Fast forward, I end up, of all places, in Taiwan, working with Manny Ramirez with this team, the Ida Rhinos. What was amazing, even the time I had in Major League Baseball, the time I had in Taiwan to be isolated in a language, the language was, I was learning simplified Chinese to go about my day-to-day activities, had an interpreter with me most of the time. It was so isolating that it gave me the opportunity to really expand thought and get outside of traditional strength and conditioning modalities. And so started down a pathway there. I was there for about 6 months before Catapult Sports found me and brought me over to that company. A CEO and a headhunter flew in. They'd heard my name in the US. They wanted to hit the US market. So they said, hey, would you be interested in being the senior applied sports scientist for Catapult? So I looked at the tech, looked at baseball and said, this is the wrong technology for baseball, guys. You don't want to go into baseball. You definitely want to be in soccer, the NFL. This is where we want to be. And so then I kind of was out of baseball for a while. I implemented tech stacks for 21 NFL teams, got to know guys in the NBA league office really, really well. I got to know basically every sport and learn about every sport outside of baseball through this technology, which was fun. So got to do that, came back into baseball, was recruited over to Whoop, the consumer wearable. And the first thing I did was set up a study in Major League Baseball and communicated with the Major League Baseball Players Association and MLB. We had 247 athletes in the minor leagues, non-40-man guys, wearing the device. Did a lot of work with the Cubs. My buddy Bobby Basham, who's there, was one of the first ones to implement and look at this. We're looking at recovery. We really wanted to understand how well these athletes were recovering between games. So we did a big 12-month project with them. I had some concerns around the quality of the data itself, and there was some kind of black box things going on. I knew the photoplethysmography is the technology. I knew that wasn't optimized, especially when it's wrist worn. There's a lot of noise and a lot of artifact going on there. I knew it wasn't optimally giving us the data that we needed for the long term in Major League Baseball. But at that point, when I left Whoop, where did I end up? Straight back in baseball. So my interpreter over in my first round of Taiwan becomes an assistant GM with the biggest team there, the Brothers. And so in 2017, he brought me back to really focus on reducing injury. And that's where we had a 0 injury season. It took 4 years to get it, but we had a 0 injury season there.
That's really an incredible process, and we could probably spend an entire episode on any single one of those ventures that you took on. But maybe where we should spend the majority of our time is talking about the translation of some of the marketing of the Brothers baseball team and how it looks in English with posters such as Brothers Got Balls. That's probably the most important thing we could spend our time talking about.
Some of the translation stuff we would have. There's that movie Lost in Translation for a reason, right? I'd see things. I would hear gangster rap being played over the speakers with 40,000 people in a stadium going, hang on a minute, you can't say that. And I was like, no, you can say that because no one understands what's being said here. I was like, my God, just weird stuff like that would happen all the time. But look, my time in Taiwan was stunning. Like if someone said to me, okay, you've got a chance, you can go and relive your time in Taiwan or relive your time in Major League Baseball. Yeah, I'm going to Taiwan. Just the energy, the desire, still very much a team-based sport, and the desire to hold up the team and to be proud of the team is something that kind of missed in sport for a long time, that I would see in certain pockets in the US, but a lot more so internationally is what I would see. Yeah, Taiwan was phenomenal. It was a great place to be.
I tried to catch you off guard a little bit, maybe treat that like I was going to say something serious and just go right into some of the marketing or the jokes that I know you kept with you over the years. Because I've even seen you make a couple presentations where you bring up the Brothers Got Balls poster, which is just a great one. But all right, let's talk about now the structure of the Brothers kind of, I guess, organization in a sense, because obviously having an injury-free season wasn't just you. I would love to give you the credit for it, but there's so many incredible people in place, whether it's athletic trainers, strength coaches, the on-field coaches being in touch with the front office, everybody communicating. And it wasn't just like you guys stepped in, did it in 1 year, but you saw continual improvement over time. So maybe if you could take us through kind of the bird's eye view of everything that happened. Your call if you want to do it year to year or take breaks like chapters. I just want to pass this over to you so we can get a look at how you and your team accomplished just tremendous injury rate reductions with the Brothers organization.
And a good way to look at this too is like if you're driving through a city right now, if you're listening to this in your car, I mean, you look around, you see some incredible buildings. Think, man, the team that built that building is aesthetically beautiful as it is. It's like, wow, that's phenomenal. And it's just started with an architect, right? And that's who I was. I was just the architect, right? Just the architect alone. You imagine that guy standing in the field with his rolled up plans. He ain't building the building, right? It's everybody else that has to build the building. So I had a phenomenal team. And this was something that I dove into really early. So we started out, how this started, Adam, I had to do an injury audit across the system. So the Brothers were averaging over the 4 years of data that I looked at, 2012, 13, 14, and 15 was the data sets that I was looking at. It was 2016 when I first started there, not 17. When I was looking at that 4 years data, the average was some years were 34, some years were 31, 30. It was an average of about 32 significant injuries, which accounted for about 800, it was somewhere around 890 man games lost per season, right? So when you think about maybe it's a grade 4 hamstring, what we call a grade 4 hamstring here in the US, and that's going to maybe lay somebody out for 4 weeks, 6 weeks, somewhere in there, right? So it was all those days, and in baseball, those days add up because it's man games lost. We're playing every day, right? So they add up. So 890 man games lost. If you look at the business efficiency of that, it's really poor, right? I mean, so the very first thing when my interpreter got over there and became the assistant GM, Ellery Chen. His name is brilliant guy too. He's going to be one of those sports executives in the future that we're all going to look at and say, that's the GM of the future. This is who this guy is. He turned around and said, look, come on, look at this data. I said, so let me get with the head athletic trainer. Firstly, we had to translate everything, get everything out of simplified Chinese into English. And then I requested film. And I spent about 3 months just doing a really solid audit on the mechanisms of injury and what was preventable versus what was ballistic, what we could see coming, what possibly couldn't, what data we had access to at the time. Upon all this, when I realized we're losing 800 man games a year, we need to put systems in place. Let me look at the strength and conditioning models, very similar replicated models from Major League Baseball in the United States, right? These are the heavy lifts and everything that we're doing. And there was no consideration on something like asymmetry in baseball, which I believe for a long time, even my last year at Whoop, I was doing a presentation, Adam, to all the team doctors at Major League Baseball and the head athletic trainers. This was in Washington, D.C. at winter meetings. And I remember just looking out at this room prior to giving the presentation on Whoop and the findings we had. I asked all the team docs, I said, guys, how many of you believe asymmetry is a leading cause of the preventable musculoskeletal injuries that we have in baseball? And every hand in the room went up. Yeah, this asymmetry plays a part. I said, do me a favor, leave your hand up if your organization has a strength and conditioning model that is offsetting asymmetry. Every hand went down. So there was a major disconnect for me, even at that point in time. And I always knew symmetry was a consideration that had to prevent long-term injury. And I started this, I was training Cy Young Award winner Dallas Keuchel with the Houston Astros. And Keuchel could go out and throw 120 pitches. And then when I had him at AAA and when I had him in the major leagues, we'd go and train the other side of his body to try to reflect the volume of work that he did on his left side. We'd want to do it on his right side. And we would start to open it up. I created exercises and everything to offset the asymmetry. We didn't have a lot of measurement tools in Major League Baseball at that time. And I remember Dallas, the thing he said to me was, he came to me in August and he goes, my body feels fresh, feels brand new. And I was like, okay, well, that helps me a ton, right? That helps me give some credence to offsetting asymmetry may be a thing here. So going into this opportunity with the brothers, I thought there's one thing I'll try out of the gate, because you can't change everything overnight, right? You can't all of a sudden be implementing 12 different new modalities to a staff that has never seen this before. So I thought, I'm just going to take it a step at a time. I think asymmetry, from what I could understand from the mechanisms of the injuries that we were looking at, that this was a leading cause of this. So I said, we're going to do some asymmetry offsets, or we're going to do year one. Adam, year one, we had a 75% reduction in preventable injury. 75%. We took it from the average of 32 incidents. We took that down to 8 in the first year. And so that was, a lot of it was, okay, guys, the hitters, I'd have them, how many swings they're taking in the cage. In Asia, we have an overtraining situation there, right, as well. I turned around and said, guys, just take some swings from the other side for me. Let's get in the habit of getting the other side trained. Pitchers, when they would come out of games, I'd get them, start working the other side of their body. In terms of defense, one of the things we did with all the defensive players, we would run the lip of the infield from third to first. We'd turn them the other way, right? To try to make sure that, when I was looking at hamstring injuries across Major League Baseball, they were always left leg and they were lead leg and they were outside, from a curvilinear aspect of base running. So where we'd see all these injuries. So we put systems in place year one to offset asymmetry. And that had a 75% reduction in preventable injury. And I knew we were onto something then. That was the very first step we took. To understand the model, I mean, one of I think the massive failures we have in Major League Baseball is a lot of things live in silos. And I know you've experienced this, right? Whether it's the strength and conditioning silo, the athletic training silo, those two things are often in different offices and set apart. It's like, if anything should be joined at the hip, it's those two, right? but quite often we'd see them in silos, coaches disregarding strength and conditioning, a lot of them, right? Just pushing it off to the side. The fault there was nothing was athlete-centric. And I said, look, from a model perspective, everything we do has got to be like, it's almost like Formula One, right? When the car pulls in, the car is the center of activity. These athletes are the center of our activity. Strength and conditioning, athletic training, sports psychology. I want everybody on the same page, and we want transparency entirely through this process. So we set up the model I set up, and Will Carroll actually printed this in his book, The Science of Baseball. That's done really well, that book. The model I had was, it starts and finishes, well, starts really at the very core with understanding the emotional and psychological state of the athlete, right? What are they presenting with? Are they a young athlete that's been up all night, taking care of a baby? What was their sleep like? What was their emotional state? And what was their cognitive state like? We had nothing to really measure that. I had my staff go up and I say, check in with the player, ask them how they're feeling, and try to make notes daily on how are they feeling. And so we were trying to understand that as good as we could. And then we would get data from the next layer, which was physical systems, understanding physical systems. So one of the very first things I implemented was TrackMan. We weren't capturing any data during the course of the games in this league. Now the entire league is set up with TrackMan, but I was the first one to implement it. I said, I really want to understand externally. We want to look at things like arm acceleration and velocity. I want to understand those things. So we were starting to get some really good data. And it got to the point in year 3, Adam, I'll fast forward to this, in year 3, I'd have the data scientist from under the stadium roll up, tap me on the shoulder and go, you need to come and look at this. And I could go and look at where a pitcher was relative to his certain markers that we were looking at. Like, we actually, and this, for anyone who's in Major League Baseball, there is an absolute goldmine of data sitting in TrackMan that no one appears to be tapping into. So we know about injury, right? So if you're a medical practitioner, or if you're a strength and conditioning coach, or even a coach, you may understand how injuries like non-contact, non-ballistic injuries occur. There's a 3-step pathway to that injury. It's fatigue, then it's compensation, then it's the injury that occurs, right? It's that pathway: fatigue, compensation, injury. So one of the markers that I pulled out, I actually did this with a couple of the guys at Zone 7, the AI company, their CTO. I was like, unpack this data with me. Let's start really ripping into this. One of the data sets we found, because I was like, if I could find out where compensation was starting, I could offset that injury. So one of the markers that you can find inside a TrackMan, you have to build an algorithm to do this. TrackMan will take a measure of maximum horizontal position, maximum vertical position, and also release point. And guess what? Those 3 things are millisecond timestamp. So you can go A plus B plus C. You can create what's called arm acceleration on those 3 markers, right? Arm acceleration and velocity. Now let's correlate those 2 markers, right? If I've got arm acceleration of X and velocity of 95, and then I go to arm acceleration of Y and velocity at 95, like if I've had to increase my arm acceleration to maintain that velocity, which is kind of a subconscious pattern, right? If I'm doing that, then if my arm acceleration is faster, what has changed in my physical body, right? My legs could have fatigued, trunk might have fatigued, something has changed at that point in time. So as long as you look at this not as a one-off, not as just on one pitch, but if you look at this over a temporal kind of in-inning kind of position, like, oh boy, I would end up walking up. Once I got that tap on the shoulder from the data scientist 3 years in who knew what we were looking for, I'd start to see that. I would immediately go up into the dugout, look to see our pitcher, say Nick Adderton, one of our bigger pitchers, big lefty, if he was between innings, I'd check in with him, just say, how you feeling? I'd go up and look at the hitters he was scheduled to face on the very next inning. I'd look for things like, okay, if he's a lefty and he's going to be throwing, we've got 3 big righties coming in, he's going to be throwing a lot of cutters, which are high strain on him. We'd start to look at things like that to try to understand. And I could look at our manager. I had 3 different managers in the time I was at Taiwan, but Scott Butner, who was formerly of the Mariners, was our manager at the time. He had seen me coming towards him. He'd go, how much more time has he got? And so we had this relationship where he knew I wasn't making, you've got to make the tactical decision, pitching coach. This is, I'm just giving you the information. Just know that if he goes more than this, say next inning, or if you're pushing him out 2 innings, we may have to, depending on time of year it was, we may have to pull his bullpen back a day. What are we sacrificing in the future for what we're trying to achieve now? Right. So those discussions were coming up, and they were all database decisions, which I love. Right. These were not guesses or opinions. And sure, there were a lot of arguments early when we're trying to implement a data-driven model. But over time, it was like the data, while it didn't decide, it informed us really well, right, on how to do things. So we had physical systems data, technical, tactical, strategic in this whole model that when we lost a game, we could actually go back through and look at where potentially we lost the game. Did we lose it technically? Did we lose it tactically? Did coaching staffs make bad decisions? Was the athlete fatigued? Was he just not in the mind state to be able to execute that day? There were so many variables that I understood we needed to look at to try to get to zero injury. I think one of the biggest mistakes, and we've talked about this, I think, Adam, a few times, about how we look at data, especially in sports, we tend to look at it in linearity. 1 + 1 = 2. And it's the human body, unfortunately, is chaos theory, right? It's a number of interdependent, interrelated physical systems. Depending on the outcome you're trying to achieve, those systems have a hierarchy of priority, of importance to that outcome. So that's the way I've always tried to look at things. And in our approach to zero injury, if that is the approach, and I remember year 3, at the end of year 3, we had 2 injuries. We're down to just 2. And I thought that was pretty good, right? So I go up to the president of the team and I said to him, I said, mate, I said, listen, I said, I think we can take some more risks now in training and practice and stuff that may establish a little bit more power lines for some of these guys, but know that it's risk, right? They were so enamored with the injury reduction and the fact that we're in championships every year because of this, that they decided, no, just keep doing what you're doing. And so, so I thought 2 was pretty good, but no, thank God we got down to 0 that last year. And the 2 we had in year 3 were in the last damn 2 weeks of the season too, these 2 injuries. We had a rain delay and our oldest player on unkempt ground pulled a hamstring, rounding first base, hit a wet patch on the dirt, and then hamstring gone. And then I had the other one I joke about a little bit. We had a pitcher come in, can't pitch today, my back's killing me. Oh, what happened? What'd you do? I said, looking at all the data, like, he should be perfect, ready to go starter, ready to go. No, I had a fight with his wife, slept on the couch the night before, and his back was really bad because he doesn't have a good couch. I'm like, dude, look, I'm not a marriage counselor. I said, but get a better couch, please. It's like, find somewhere better to sleep. So that was a start that we lost in that 3rd season. But this was the other thing, Adam. We weren't chasing zero injury either. We were trying to stay focused on the individual qualitative nature of what was going on. It was in the last 2 weeks, actually, of season 4, where I looked at our head athletic trainer. I said, have we even had an injury this year? And he's like, yeah, we're at 0. And I was like, shit, you just get caught up in it. And you're so focused on the individual needs of the athletes that it wasn't something we chased. It came about because of the focus that our staff had on those individuals.
That's wonderful. That could, again, be a podcast in itself. There are, of course, so many ways we can stem from this. I'm going to call out a few, and hopefully in the process we can avoid too much skipping around and still keep it succinct. But we're going to start walking this way back to the beginning when you talked about the audit. There's so many people now at different levels that could be in charge of an audit. Everybody has a system, whether you're at Little League all the way up to professional baseball. So whether it's at the individual level or if it is at the highest level of the game, how would you introduce an audit where somebody, for example, they had Tommy John, or it's an athletic trainer at an underfunded Division II school. What would you encourage them to do to start to correct the process or make it better for the future?
Yeah, there's really 2 ways to go about this, in my opinion. The very first thing we want to understand is, like, when we're doing an injury audit, let's just invent one. Yeah, we'll go soft tissue hamstring injury just because it's so damn prevalent. The the very first thing I want to understand is the mechanism of that injury. When did it first show up? We know that where it showed up wasn't the beginning of it. We know it's probably a 2-week period prior to that injury showing up where there would be some data that will support that it was coming on. Most of the time, we can see an injury 2 weeks out if we know what we're looking for. That's something that became very evident to me. We could see it. And back to that understanding of arm acceleration and understanding velocity and understanding when was one of the things sure enough, within 10 days, 10 to 14 days, if we saw changes within that window, there was an injury likely. And I had the guys at Zone 7, it was Ayal Eliakim at Zone 7, the CTO, went back and looked at 10 years of Major League Baseball data, and we looked at the injuries, and sure enough, they're all showing against arm acceleration metrics and everything else. When they were doing deep meta-analysis, we could see these things. And so that's why I say that's a gold mine piece of information to understand it, but it really starts with the mechanism of that injury. The second thing the thing that's known, right, is the most indicative projection of an injury is a pre-existing injury, right? If an athlete's had a hamstring injury, chances are he's going to have another, right? So that always tells me, that mentality told me that we might be addressing symptoms, not causes of injury. So my buddy Marcus Elliott over at P3, brilliant practitioner and researcher as well. He looks at, does so much work in the NBA now that we can look at a guy like James Harden and understand his superpower is his breaking ability on the court. He doesn't run fast. He doesn't jump high like everybody else in the NBA, but he can stop on a dime and change the geometry of the court, which tactically is where his brilliance lies. So Marcus Elliott looks at a lot of injuries and a lot of kind of movement systems is what he's looking at. And in some of the discussions we've had, it's like there's individual movement signatures. We all have them, right? How did we develop? I'll bring it back online to pitchers, for example. And I remember having this discussion with Brent Strom many a time. Brent's like, okay, we're going to drop his arm slot. We're going to take him from over the top. I'm going to get him down to the side. The very first question I'd have is like, okay, so you're making that change tactically. You want to get late run on the fastball. You want it to run in more. Is that the goal here? And it'd be yes, and then it'd be a plus a few things. Brent would tell me that it'd blow the top of my head off, right? Because he's such a brilliant thinker. And then I'd go, okay, well, if we're adjusting from, say, a over the top to a 3/4 arm position, guess what? Everything changes in terms of the mechanics of how he decelerates now. He might be using lat over the top for a deceleration muscle, whereas as soon as you drop to the side, we're using more trapezius. So there's going to be soreness. Let's understand soreness not as a pathway towards injury, but as a potential pathway to adaptation, right? We need that. We need to have that feedback. So in directing an audit, we need to understand the mechanism of the injury. We need to pull any data that we've got historically from that athlete as well, including their pre-existing injury history. Looking at the data sets, we can find something, right? That say, this looks like it matches up to that injury. But then it's about getting down to the core aspect of it. If say it was a hip girdle change, just the way that athlete's moving, we need to make those corrections from a corrective exercise kind of position. But the other thing, Adam, too, is once we've done that, it's kind of like you can't stay in that box looking for where the injury is affecting the rest of movement. You have to step back. Maybe the rest of movement is affecting that injury site, right? We've got to have a total look at this, and we've got to look at it through child's eyes almost every time we look at an athlete. I had a local team here in spring training want me to come and look at a pitcher's rehabilitation, and I had the head of rehab standing next to me saying, let me tell you what we're looking at here. I said, no, I don't want to hear it. I want to see this through fresh eyes, and then I'll tell you what I'm seeing after a couple of runs. I just watched him run for warm up, watch the throws, your typical major league starting pitcher day. I was watching that and I said, well, here's what I got. Here's what I'm seeing. Wow, I wasn't seeing that. So look, there's things that you've got to look at. I think you've got to take a holistic view of movement to understand what is affecting the potential of an injury and what isn't. From the mechanism standpoint, when did the injury occur? Film of it if I could get it, data supporting it, pre-existing injury, go through the rehabilitation process, reassess, step back and reevaluate, and step back and not look at it through the injury itself. To me, those were the most important things, and that methodology from an audit process served us pretty well.
Awesome. Now we are going to accelerate a little into that previous conversation. We're going to leave the audit where it is, and now we're going to talk about the stages of the injury. So the fatigue, the compensation, and ultimately the
Yeah,
event, the injury actually
yeah,
occurring. And I want to dig deeper specifically on compensation. Fatigue, I feel like as an industry, we have a decent understanding of. It
yeah,
doesn't just mean we're tired and we need to sleep. It could be an endurance thing, it could be a workload management thing. There are a lot of components now that
yeah,
fall into the basic fatigue discussion.
yeah, yeah,
Now, bringing up compensation, I think still offers the visual of my right hip hurts, so I lean to my left to
yeah,
compensate, right?
yeah.
That is what we see, or a
Mm,
change in a walking gait.
mm.
Now, from the work that we do with FlexPro Grip, we've become privy to what compensation can actually look like,
Yeah,
meaning the stress of a certain musculature changes because
yeah,
of fatigue elsewhere.
yeah,
Something has to take on more
yeah.
than what it really should be taking on. So I want to pass this back to you, given that you've done it more globally, of what compensation can actually present as
Yeah.
versus what we normally discuss it as in the industry.
Yeah, I think we normally discuss fatigue. Anytime we talk about fatigue, I think the immediate image is athlete hands on knees, blowing, and that's fatigue, right? Well, no, it can take on so many different like factors outside of physiological fatigue. Local muscle fatigue, global muscle fatigue, neural fatigue, CNS fatigue. Continue to go down the list. There's a lot of fatigues, but as it applies to, and this is, I think, one of the other failings we have in the industry here, and apologies for this kind of getting scattered, but yeah, we tend to stay in the box in strength and conditioning quite often, right? We're in this box where we've got a set of modalities that served us well, maybe. I continue to hear strength coaches go, oh, he just did a 420-pound squat. That's his best. He's a starting pitcher. He's starting in 2 days' time. I'm like, I don't give a shit what he did in the weight room. How is that affecting the key performance indicators on the field? Because that's all that matters at the end of the day. We're in this sport, right? Pitching coaches, I go to them all the time, tell me the KPIs for not only for your pitching staff, but for this individual pitcher. And what are you expecting out of him? And what is the goal with him this year? What's his contract status? How much resources am I going to be able to apply to this guy? Sometimes you'd get a guy at the end of the season called up, and sure enough, you got a month with this kid, and he's probably going to sign with another team at the end of that period anyway. So it's like, what do you apply in terms of resources? There's so many factors firstly that go into this, but talking about fatigue and compensation, getting to that marker, when does it happen? I like for pitchers, the key performance indicators are going to be velocity and spin rate. Those are the two that I'm going to look at. What's coming out of their hand. Location could be a third one we look at, but the hierarchy of today's game is pretty much that: velocity, spin rate, location. It used to be location, movement, velocity. It used to be it used to be something totally the opposite, right? And that's when ERAs, you had a good ERA, you were in the ones, right? Ones and twos. Now ERAs are blown up, I think, because of the change in the game and change in focus on the key performance indicators. So to know when compensation is occurring from fatigue, we have to have an additional marker, something on those KPIs. So velocity was the one I would look at. I'd look at spin a little bit, but I know pitchers can make just one slight adjustment on a grip because they've seen something dimensionalized off that hitter. Like I remember having this discussion at the Astros with Roger Clemens. I remember sitting with him. It was his 48th birthday, and we were in Vegas of all places, and that's where that story stops. But I'll tell you what he told me about pitching. I just learned so much from him in this conversation. It was so brilliant. He had to own the 12 inches in front of the plate in terms of what that looked like. So he would throw a pitch, a hitter would just foul it off, and he'd go, God, he was right on that. So I'm going to adjust millimeters of grip here, and I'm going to pull this back a little bit. It's going to look like the same pitch, but I'm going to get him out in front. That's what I'm going to do, right? So we'd have that when I was kind of in those conversations and learning about the psychology of pitching and how those tactical adjustments are made at the elite level. Compensation for us at the elite level is not something that is conscious. Adam, it's generally subconscious, and you know this with your lead athletes. All they're trying to do is figure out the environmental change and how I'm going to get that hitter out. Like Clemens was trying to figure out how I'm going to get that hitter out. So I'm going to alter spin rate on the baseball to do that. So if I looked at just velocity and just spin rate as a number, and there was it's not a max effort every time, right? There's tactical change that goes on. So we need to look at this over a few different pitches. But those were the things I'd look at. Arm acceleration specifically against velocity was a good indication that some compensation had begun. Where, I don't know. We try to look at things like high-speed film. There was a lot of core is where we thought we were starting to get a fair bit of fatigue was in trunk, the trunk kind of fatigue. But we didn't have anything to really measure that. But I knew that as long as I was correlating those two numbers, velocity against acceleration, that marker that we developed, if I could see that, I knew compensation was happening. So yeah, always had to be a second marker, and specifically where I'd get buy-in is if it's against the KPIs of the game, then perfect, right? That's what we need to understand.
So I want to now kind of go on the same mission we went on before, applying the audit to maybe those without the technologies. So if we break down what tech might be available at the lower levels of the game, what are ways an individual can look for compensation? I'm assuming it's very similar with a force plate or with VBT in the weight room or different things like that. No, it might not be on-field data, but I assume if you see changes there and maybe the weight was able to stay the same or the jump height stayed the same, but the forces changed, different things like that, I assume are where compensation is rearing its ugly head.
And it really does depend. I mean, most of the tests that we do in the lab, and I mean, this is where wearables have come on strong, as we want in situ measurement, right? I like to look at what's going on the field, and it's not always the weight room measures. When I was TrackMan, I called the former president of TrackMan. And actually, there's a guy there now, Bill Furcus, who used to be head of sportsman over at the Houston Astros, who's now heading up TrackMan, which I love because I think he's going to bring this in from a position of biometrics as opposed to just tactical stuff. But Bill's over there now, but it was the former CEO there, Hans Deumer, his name was. And Hans is a great guy. I love him to death. I called him. This is back it was my first year with the brothers. The guys over at Coach Me Plus were showing me some of the data they had from the Mets. They had brought me in to look at their data and try to understand these markers on fatigue and everything else. I was asking questions about how to use that data from a bioanalytic standpoint that no one was asking. And Hans said, we've had that question asked by 2 teams in Japan only. And he goes, I like the way you're approaching this. Could we hire you to go and work with these 2 teams? And I was like, well, I'm out in Asia all the time with my team in Taiwan. I said, yeah, look, I'm happy to go over and work with it. And I'll never forget the meeting I had with the Yokohama Bay Stars. So we're in the 4-hour afternoon meeting in this conference room. My wife, who's a professor in nutrition, she had to sit through this interpreted meeting with me for a long time, which was great. God bless her. She sat through the whole thing. But at the end of this, pitching staff, we had 6 pitching coaches from the organization in there. And I was showing them things like this arm acceleration metric, which they use now today, showing them how to look at that against velocity, where these things might be occurring and how it all kind of breaks down. I gave them so much information at that point in time that the interpreter for the pitching coaches leaned in and said to me, Gary goes, there seems to be some confusion here. They're looking for one number to indicate what makes a pitcher better than another pitcher, or what makes that pitcher most likely to be successful today. What does that just give me one number? And I stood back and we had all the data kind of blown up on this board. I said, do me a favor. And the data scientists were brilliant in there. I said, pull all this out. I said, I want to see the average ball exit velocity of the hitters this pitcher faces. If you want one marker for the sport of baseball that is going to indicate a pitcher is successful or not successful, look at the opposition team's average ball exit velocity, because that'll take into account now things like deception, right? Because the one thing in Japanese baseball that I learned, I was looking for a load marker that would indicate, okay, velocity, say, Adam, your average fastball is 96, and all of a sudden you're throwing 97, you're throwing higher spin rate, right? I was like, is that more load? Right? That's what I was expecting. Load on the body does not just come from spin rate and arm velocity. pitchers in Japan have really high spin rates, but they throw a damn forkball, right, which has no spin on it whatsoever. So the spin rate, high strain pitch on the arm, low spin rate. So you can't correlate spin rate against that. So, but when pitching coaches would ask this question, how do you define a pitcher, his value? To me, if you want one marker that is an objective marker and not a subjective thought, it's ball exit velocity of the opposite team. And they had a discussion around that lasted about 5 minutes, leaned in and said, fuck yeah, that's the number we want. So we hit on something there that, again, when you're developing high performance cultures, the battle is to just get out of your own way and look at things through a different set of lenses.
I think that's stated beautifully because we are always looking for one specific answer in what is traditional to a certain extent, right? We're expecting it to be within our grasp for what we have currently, as opposed to stepping aside and understanding kind of like the blind man and the elephant type situation where every single one of those guys was entirely correct, but they're also entirely wrong. Of course, if somebody's touching a tusk, it's very different from touching the trunk or the tail or the leg or the belly. And oftentimes when we're in organizations, going back to what you talked about in your intro, talking about silos, every single department may be entirely correct, but every single department is also wholly wrong unless they're looking at the entire system and
100%.
What we can produce out of that. So now maybe this is getting out of the lens or the scope that you normally work in, but I'd be curious of your potential excitement now of these people or these entities that are creating kind of aggregate style data where they're making a prediction in a single number off of a bunch of different data points brought together. Do you think that is indicative of the whole story? Is it just a decent summary? How do you feel about all these things?
Yeah, it's case by case. I mean, I get sensitive to statements that potentially are one size fits all because I've never seen one. That was my problem in Major League Baseball, was the fact that my days were so long because I had 25 individual programs when I was in the major leagues. I didn't have a program for pitchers, a program for hitters. No. Everything was individualized and needed to be. And it was the same with my time in Taiwan as well. So the very first thing, it's case by case. There's never one size fits all. And I'd say this to Stromy too, when he would say, okay, tactically, we're going to look at this shift. What I mentioned earlier, change in, say, arm slot. And I'd go through and speak to the points that, we're going to have soreness, we're going to have adaptation. And I go, it's not that simple to drop him down. I said, because the neural pathway has been developing since that kid first stood up in the crib and threw his rattle out of his crib. As soon as he was on his feet and he threw something, that's when it started. That's when that signature movement pathway started. And how do individual pitchers provide force, right? How is that force production authored? And what does the signature of that movement look like? And we are also markedly different in the way we produce force behind that 5.5 ounce sphere, right? We're all different. So the very first thing is understanding the individual movement sequence and signature of the athlete. I'd often look for leaks in that system, like, ooh, the elbow's really exposed, right? We need to get more protection around that. I'm not going to alter the way you throw. I'm just going to set you up in such a way that you can keep throwing that way and be protected, right? That was one of the big kind of milestone kind of moments, I think, even for the athletes that were in our system as well. They started to take a lot more ownership and personal pride in the programs because they were, we'll use that English term, bespoke. They were customized. They were right on target for them. And that included things like asymmetry offsets, what we called vector force relationships, improving those as well. Yeah, and it was so individualized, Adam, that it was never just one thing. And from a tactical perspective, yeah, I still like ball exit velocity for pitchers, right? As an average, right? I think to me, that's a great marker to look at. But over time, it depends on the pitcher. It depends on the position he's in. Is he a starter? Is he an 80-pitch starter? Is he a 120-pitch starter? Right? What does that look like? Or is he a reliever that's come 3 out of 4 nights out of the bullpen and is going to throw maybe 6 pitches? Right? They're the hardest guys in the world to program because you never know. You're reactive. consistently reactive. You can be proactive with starters. You got to be reactive with relievers, because the last thing I held sacred, as much as sometimes my ego wanted to dictate the outcome of a game, right? To go up to a manager and go, get him out of here now. I wanted to walk out across the line sometimes and pull a pitcher. It's not about me. This is about the game. This is about the fans. This is about getting that win and what do we need to do. And the data doesn't decide, it informs. And I'm just part of the mechanism to inform. So I'd inform our managers, and I had some really good ones. I had 3 really good ones in Taiwan. Even Corey Snyder was a former major league player that we had for a couple of years. Corey culturally was awkward over in Taiwan, but when he leaned in and realized that you don't have to be scared here, Corey, this is a wonderful environment to be in. Manage this as you would manage it. And the reason you hear me keep bringing these things up, Adam, is looking back, the most important thing is developing that high performance culture. Are we considerate of that at every touch point, from the moment that athlete hits our facilities or our stadium or whatever it is? Do we have a high performance culture in place? What does the food look like in the clubhouse? What's accessibility to massage, to stretching? What's accessibility to the cage right now and a hitting coach? Where are these things, right? And how do we make them at every touch point? Can I get that 1% improvement? Because that's what we're looking for. It's like when we're training youth athletes, we might, and this is a Marcus Elliott statement, slack in the system. How much slack do we have? You've got a youth athlete at 12, 13, 14, you might have a 40% improvement that you can render over 3 to 4 years. Major leagues, man, if I get 0.5% improvement, I've done really well, right? So knowing that as well, that what change can be made, and is it positive to the trajectory of that athlete, right? Everyone's on their own path and their own trajectory. But I think high performance cultures, developing those to ensure that the athlete feels like they are the most important person in the world every time they're in our care.
And expanding on that culture, I assume a good bit of it is also changing the zeitgeist around medical care or around athletic training, and understanding that we can do things that are preventative and helpful, because so many years of sports, the adage was you can't make the club in the tub. But now, thankfully, things are changing a bit, and the tub can be a supportive thing. It's not just, well, I'm hurt, I shouldn't go in the athletic training room. So I'm guessing that's a cultural component as well, or just the way that a team or an organization sets up the support staff.
100%. And the interesting part of that too is, like I was saying earlier, we never chased zero injury. We landed there because of our intense focus individually, day to day, on these athletes. Even with the medical side of the equation, working with our athletic trainers, Aso was the nickname of our head athletic trainer, brilliant guy, and Charlie, another guy who now works with the Taiwanese national team. They were really good at questions. They were really good at questioning. One of the very first teachings with them, don't have preconceived notions in your mind about that athlete. Ask these questions. Firstly, how are you feeling? How's everything at home? Did you get a good night's sleep last night? And we would implement tech over time, like Aura Ring, and we had Whoop early stages. We started to implement the tech to give them an understanding that it's total care that we're interested in. While you're a member here at the Brothers, we would do things like, I can't tell you how many times players would bring their kids in for something, right? We had a real family approach here. We kept the walls up so the rest of the world couldn't see what we're doing, because we had some proprietary, what was considered competitive advantage with reducing injuries the way we were reducing them. And it got to the point where there'd be outcry in the press that it's unfair that the Brothers have such low, it's unfair. No, it's intelligent. We're just going about it a little bit differently. But yeah, the high performance culture, I had to look at it every day. I would get off the bus coming from the team hotel. I'd unpack and I'd go in with fresh eyes every day. And I'd check in with all my staff first and foremost, check in with all of them. How are you doing? I generally have a leadership style that is served from the back. Sometimes I'd have to get in the middle, but it was never me out front. It was like, okay, like we introduced the J protocol for a hamstring rehabilitation in year 1. I said, I want you to look at the protocols that you've been using. I want you to look at a differentiated protocol here that is showing some research relative to getting someone back from grade 2, grade 3 specifically, getting some stuff done faster here. Because that's how and everybody had a measure. If we had an injury, was out on the athletic trainers, training staff, how quickly can we return them to full participation? How quickly can we get them back there? Strength and conditioning coaches working hand in hand with athletic training guys. How do you make sure this injury never happens again? Right? How do we get that type of focus with these two divisions of the company, and how do we pull that into perspective? There was always that going on during the course of the season. It was never just go in and apply a methodology. Adam, the biggest thing, one of the biggest changes we made in, like, we did the asymmetry offset year one, but also, and I did this back in 2013 when my interpreter was just my interpreter, and I was there, I was with the EDAR Rhinos with Manny Ramirez, and I was looking around at the amount of volume of work that they were doing, and there was kind of not enough time to recover. So I thought, you know what, the best thing I can do is get everybody to start foam rolling, right? Self-myofascial release. Let's get into that and make that that's the first thing we do every day. You know, when the team's together, okay, SMR, that's what we're starting with. And I remember going up to my interpreter and I grabbed one of the old trigger point foam rolls out of my bag that I brought from the US. And I said, Ellery, I've got 55 athletes on this major league roster going into the season. We've got another 50 in the minor leagues here as well. I said, I need you to go out. We're going to implement this. Everyone needs their own foam roll. Ellery looks at me and says, foam roll? What the hell is a foam roll? And I showed it to him. He goes, I've never seen anything like this. I flipped it over. I said, look, man, it says made in Taiwan. Everything's made here. You've got to go and find these. They're here somewhere. Sure enough, he comes back with 55 of them, and they cost him like $4 each. They were costing us like $30 in the US. It was hilarious. But we had everybody, start this process of self-myofascial release. And the way we talked to the athletes about it was like, when you were a little boy and you carried your teddy bear everywhere, this is your new teddy bear. I think we make a lot of mistakes in foam roll here, right? It's like, when you feel that pressure point, hold it for 30 seconds. Let's release. IT band was a big one, hamstrings, glutes, we would get into everything. We'd have a good 15 minutes of self-myofascial release prior to any activity during the day. That was the very first thing we would start with. So it was all those little things, but a lot of it was education. So asymmetry, foam roll first year, it was about all I could do, right? And it's about as much as we could absorb, but it was effective.
At the beginning of that response, you brought up this theme in a sense of a stress-free environment. The kids were coming in. It sounds like, yes, the walls were up, but internally, players and staff could be relaxed or be who they really are as individuals. I've had a couple conversations recently where the words being tossed around were, isn't it amazing what a free mind can do for the body? So I'd love if, from your perspective, if you could kind of take that away, talk about how you've seen just relaxation and stress-free environments impact both performance and physical health.
Incredible. And Adam, we're touching on stuff that really for the last couple of years, I am just personally learning as well. There's a lot of, and you're probably seeing this, and I'm waiting for one of the Major League Baseball teams to have a breath coach come in, right, and start teaching breathing patterns and systems. And there is something to be said for this. And I was giving a presentation, like I was still am on a performance advisory board for the group leaders in performance who do these seminars globally and mostly across all sports. Their biggest seminar is in the United Kingdom. They have one in London every year around November. I was speaking at this one a year and a half ago. It was 320 of the world's best performance practitioners across all sports. People like Great British Cycling, who are absolutely brilliant. And I'm giving this presentation. And so, sure enough, gave this presentation. I was right before lunch, finished the presentation, the chat, and it was all around zero injury. And I had this woman come up to me, she was 5'2", Oliver, I think, Rachel Vickery, her name is. Little New Zealand woman came up to me. She goes, Gary, she goes, I just loved your presentation. Your passion for working with athletes and seeing them succeed is fantastic. But you're a horrible breather, is what she said to me. And I was like, what? And she goes, yeah. She goes, you really breathe shallow. You must have a lot of like childhood trauma. And I was like, hang on. what are you saying? And so I said, Rachel, I said, let's do this. I said, when are you heading back? And she now lives in Australia and she lives in Brisbane, which are getting the Olympics in 8 years. I said to her, I said, when do you get back? And she goes, oh, I'm not leaving the UK for another couple of days. I said, can we have lunch? And she's a neurophysiologist. And so I picked her brain entirely around breathing and how even exhalation is going to calm the parasympathetic nervous system and how that works. So I've been doing my most recent parlay personally is into yoga. I've been doing I'm doing yoga daily now. And this is where linking breath to movement has been a phenomenal mental clearing process. So I think breathing is the precursor to preset the mind for what's ahead. So I think that we all have a mechanism and an ability to understand breath patterns. What does that do to set up a calm mind to move forward, to get us, out of that fight or flight kind of stuff that we get into in pro sports? It's so acute. It's so measured. It's such a fishbowl that those athletes have to walk into every day. Re-upping practice again, I think I would be introducing breath work right before the foam roll and getting some stuff in there just to, hey, let's bring this into perspective. Let's internalize now and get everything there. But back to that model, cognitive and emotional state to me is a filter and a precursor to physical activity. And I've seen it so many times. And artificially, it was referenced so much on the TV series Ted Lasso. Like, it was such a brilliant series. And I much to watch that through on background half the time, because it's just brilliant. It's brilliant writing. It's beautifully done, but it shows. And I read this statement once and I thought, you know what? I said, it is so evident, and it's so evident to take it on individually as well. This statement is, when the power of love overcomes the love of power, that's when we'll know peace, right? As a global society, could be talking no more about this than right now, right? Power. It's like even the love of power individually inside of an organization is creating a mindset and boxes and walls around certain thinking to occur, because we're not approaching this from the place of love that athlete, right? No matter who they are, put them in the middle of the system, love them to death through the work that you're going to put into them. And that's where we will extract. They will become, our staff will become, and great things can be expressed because of that. There hasn't been a study done, Adam, but there's an objective measure that we could dive into now, cognitive and emotional state, through what's called natural language processing in artificial intelligence. We can listen to the voice as a biosignal and understand the cognitive state or the emotional state of the individual. And I've been looking at a lot of AI kind of implements of this right now, and there's a number of companies that are starting to go down this channel. Number of industries, credit card, CIA, all these people are going into this domain right now to get a measure against that. I would love to see an objective measure of cognitive and emotional state and look at it against physical expression, like max outputs, because I'll guarantee if we got that clear, calm mind here that's ready to be operationalized, the body will follow, right? That to me is the process there. So to educate around that, I think is important. We've got to the point now, happily, that the sports psychologist is no longer the taboo lady or bearded lady that you've got to go and see at the circus, right? Yeah, we accept that mental health is something that's important. But even when we say the word mental health, we're looking at it from there could be a problem perspective. I don't want that. How about mental adaptation and resiliency? And let's start talking about those things, because those are the things that athletes need, and that's what we need them to have in moments of crisis on the field. And that when that crisis moment hits, and I've had many a situation, we were playing Japan in the World Baseball Classic. We were playing the Japanese team in Premier 12. We're at Chiba. We were leading 3-2, which was unheard of in the seventh inning. Pitcher came on with 2 outs and a runner at second. The runner at second took off with 2 outs. We're like, what the hell's going on there? Batter at the last minute turned around and bunted the ball. We froze, because we did not expect that as part of the tactics in that situation. It's like, geez, we just got surprised. They pulled this out of nowhere. And it was a brilliant move by Team Japan, who went on and beat us 4-3. But in that game, it's like that was something that was unexpected. But what I loved is our pitcher, who didn't react to the bunt, who could have made that third out and hesitated, straight after the game came into the coach's locker room and said, guys, this is all on me. He goes, I'd never seen that before. And he owned it right away. He had accountability to it. And that, to me, is one of the signals that you get from a high-performance culture, is people aren't afraid to walk in and own their mistakes, not try to defend themselves, but actually own their mistakes. What could I have done? And Dave Nilsson, our manager, former Major League All-Star, turned around and said to him, mate, none of us could have done anything. He goes, we just weren't expecting that. He goes, look, I just love the fact that you're approaching this now. Now we know. Now we know, right? I think we played Japan one other time since then and got our asses kicked. It's those moments it's not mental health, it's mental resilience and having an environment where people are open enough to be vulnerable, right? To have vulnerabilities. And I'd always get, like, at the end of tournaments, I remember our former coach, John Deeble, come up and said to me, he's now a head of scouting internationally for the Dodgers. So yeah, he's in Japan getting Sasaki, Otani, he's the guy, right? He said to me, he goes, mate, you really score well. You're the highest rated coach in our team. I said, yeah, people feel safe around me. I was the head of performance. I'm not the one that's going to make a decision whether you're in the lineup that day. All I'm here to do is serve you and make you feel good about who you are. Again, back down to those high performance cultures. There's so many touch points on them, but you got to have coaches that want to do this. It's in their heart to act and operate this way. People see through artificial service right away. One of the things we had, even as we were making staff changes over in Taiwan, the biggest thing I had was, I'm not going to write up position descriptions and stuff. Be the energy we wish to attract. That was the thing, is like, don't chase, attract. What is the energy with our staff? Who are the leaders on this team? Be that energy, expose it, and see who shows up. And that's who we're going to hire. I fired our strength coach in year 2 and replaced him with an engineer that was interested in the human body. And that was a big difference maker, because he could understand vectors, he could understand pull, push, he could understand interrelationships between muscular systems, and made a massive difference. And he'd never been a strength coach. And he's like, yeah, we got him a certification for our insurance reasons. He breezed through that really quickly, and then bang. I still think he's the best strength coach in Asia right now. We covered a lot there. I'm sorry.
No. Yeah. That was incredible. That was quite the answer. And I was about to say, I feel bad doing this because I'm about to pull us back from kind of this softer conversation that we just had there to more maybe the hard information again. And it's one more piece that I really want to get into. You touched on it earlier, talking about having all these individual programs and every individual having their own movement signature. That stuck in my head. I didn't want to leave it where it was. I knew we needed to discuss this a little bit. Now, there's a lot of hoopla in the industry currently about programming for the individual. And to me, it gets a little wonky because they're talking about programming for the individual, but then bucketing the individual off of that. That's a different discussion. But I want to know how you go about actually assessing and programming for the individual. So what do you look at? Is it stiffness versus laxity? Is it biases or compensations that we mentioned earlier? Is it like postures, different things? Just whether it's the assessment process, do you sit back and watch for a little bit? Please take it away.
Again, Adam, it comes back down to that. I'm looking at the KPIs from the game. I'm looking at things like good outing, bad outing. I'm talking to pitching coaches and the athlete especially to understand, okay, you want him to do this. And I'll give you an example of that, non-pitching example. When I was with the Houston Astros, we had an All-American out of Arizona State. He's now coaching here, doing some assistant coaching at ASU, Brett Wallace, power hitting corner infielder. And I was standing behind the cage in spring training. I think, God, it might have been 2010. And we had 2 hitting coaches behind the cage. I just finished all the warm-ups. Wally was in one of the first groups coming up to hit with JD Martinez and a couple of other athletes we had. We had a pretty decent team this second year. Still didn't do anything in Houston with them, but we had a decent team. Mike Barnwell was our major league hitting coach, and Ty Van Berkeley, who I got to know really well, was our hitting coordinator. We're in West Palm, standing right on the back of the dome there. And I just heard Barney watching Wally take his first round of swings as a lefty. God damn it, he says, Wally won't pull the ball. That's all he said, won't pull the ball. And I must have been having a good day because I wanted to challenge him on it. I said, hang on a sec, Barney. I said, is it that he won't or that he can't? Well, what do you mean he can't? I said, I'm looking at this kid swing right now, and I look at his hips look really locked up to me. Like, look at this swing. Back foot's not pivoting. He's not coming through. I said, that is stiffness in the hips. I said, we've got an imbalance there somewhere. Given an appropriate time, I'd take him out and check him out. He goes, well, take him out now. He goes, we'll get him into the next group. I was like, Wally, you got a few minutes, man? Can you come out? And we disrupted his routine, right? But I got him on a table in there, and I thought, the first thing I thought, hips. What am I going to look at here? I thought, I'll look at hip internal rotation. He had a 40% deficit on his back leg to his front leg in terms of internal rotation, right? Couldn't open it up. And so that shows up. So all of a sudden I said, look, Wally, this is going to be painful, but we're going to do a little active release here on the piriformis, glute medius. I'm really going to open up, no knee issues, work through everything with him, open him up. I swear to God, I could not have scripted this better. His first at bat in this spring training game, he launched a ball pulled a ball 420 feet. And I just watched this ball go out with the visiting team saying any of that much cheering. You see this massive shot. Wally looking into the bench with a big smile on his face. I just see these two heads of the hitting coaches look down at me though. What the hell did you do? But there was a unique situation. It was a one-off thing. They thought I rubbed dingo oil on him or something, right? No, this is a mechanical adjustment that I could see necessary. Just like a Red Bull's chief mechanic and, say, Christian Horner, the race director, Verstappen, the driver. You look at these guys, they all have different roles to play. I was the chief mechanic in that role, and I could affect the outcome of what they wanted me to do. So that essentially, again, visualized, getting it to that point of there's something technically that is going wrong that is, again, related to a physical systems regression. And this is the other thing we have with the human body as well. The interrelated interdependencies of the physical systems. I'd have pitchers come to me in season and say, I've got dead arm. There's another bullshit term we tend to use, bucket term, dead arm, right? And it's going to be 6 weeks or at least between 2 and 6 weeks I'd get from pitchers saying before my velocity is going to come back. And I would call bullshit on that. I remember we had a reliever with the Marlins, Scott Strickland, who came to me with that. He goes, yeah, it's going to be weeks before I'm back. And I was like, yeah, no. I said, here's my philosophy on this. I said, you do the same thing, Scott, every single day. The body wants to go into this thing we call homeostasis, right? Where it is more efficient every day at doing what it does. So what do you think's happening? Every day the body goes, okay, by the time you pick up that baseball, human body's turned around. It's already calculated knows what you're going to go through, right? What you're going to do is like, okay, well, instead of using 106 muscles today for this, let's use 72, right? And let's shut these muscle systems down. That to me is what dead arm was, right? Was a reduction in neural acquisition strategies by the human body. So how did I get out of that? How did I get Scott Strickland back in 4 days to max velocity? I altered the vectors and relationships and fired up the neurological system in ways that had never been done before. I added extraneous load to his full layback position and perturbated him on the table. There were so many different things. I just wanted to affect his body in ways that hadn't been touched through his normal day-to-day activities, and it pulled him out right away. So again, these were things like I'm thinking on the fly half the time. There's no protocol for these things. It's like getting back to a core operating philosophy that says, understand the way the body is working, how that individual athlete is navigating that body's working, and then pulling that into a position of there's always something to correct. There's always something to enhance. There's always room for improvement. And I think that's one of the beauties is we don't know where the finish line is for an athlete. So we can keep just constantly moving towards an adaptive process. And there's another long answer for you, mate, for what was a very simple question. But yeah, it is individual. For me, there was always a different problem to solve. Every interaction was a different problem to solve.
I think that's a great way to put it, right? It sticks to your theme. Why look for the cookie cutter answer? Why look for
Yeah.
something in the textbook when every situation presents its own unique problem? And of course, there's a ton more questions that we can go into here, but one, for sake of time, two, for sake of the audience, I don't want to give them way too much.
Yeah.
So I'm going to pause on the baseball questions. Hopefully, we can get you back on at some time in the future as we can continue to go down this rabbit hole.
These are
But
fun for me, Adam, just to have the conversation. Stirs me up, right? Just to get going. Yeah.
yeah, of course, yeah. This was all a tease in a way. Just get you excited so you can ask to come back at some point. But there is one other piece that we talked a little bit about offline, and with me being in the tech side of sports to a certain extent, and you did tease it, so this isn't straight out of left field. You talked a little bit about AI and the future of
Yeah.
sports technology. There seems to be this massive push to integrate artificial intelligence into what we're doing today. From your experience, are we at a point where that is even accessible? Where can we go? What's the future of sports tech?
Yeah, and it's super interesting. So I talked to a team yesterday that we mentioned earlier offline, and one of the reasons they reached out was to get my guidance on their implementation of artificial intelligence within their organization. And my very first question was, well, what do you want AI to do? Right? What are you looking at this to do? And it's like, I think there's this misconception that AI is this big brain. You just bring it in, plug it in, sit back and watch it work, right? Well, let's talk about this. There's so many different ways AI can affect sport. Where it's having positive effect is in the prediction potentially of tactical changes in certain sports, like how Arsenal's midfield in the EPL are going to compress in pressure goal situations. We can start to see some of this thing. Oh, okay, if these players are patterning geometrically this way, then we know what that expectation is. There's like incredible opportunity with AI tactically to help inform coaching staff. I think that is given movement capabilities and the two-dimensional nature of how we look at that, how we look at tactics, that's probably almost ready to go over on the AI side, because I think we have enough repeatability and reliability in things like camera-based technologies, in things like radar, LiDAR-based technologies that are coming online. Even some of the wearables are providing additional information. But therein lies the biggest issue we have. When I'm looking at artificial intelligence from a bioanalytics standpoint, if I'm looking at artificial intelligence in my purview to reduce preventable injury or to improve performance, they're the only two things I care about. Simplified: reduce preventable injury, improve performance. The data we're getting from wearables right now is so inaccurate, it cannot fuel the prediction capabilities of artificial intelligence. And I'll give you some indications on that. There is one of the valued at multiple billions of dollars and a consumer device that started its journey in professional sports. And I was actually involved with this. The NBA did a study on this one device and showed it to be 74% accurate at detecting heart rate during sleep and 50% accurate at detecting heart rate during activity. It's a heart rate monitor. 50% at activity, 74% during sleep. What good is that data? 93% and better would be considered scientifically interpretable data sets. Not this crap we're getting from this consumer wearable. It just does not apply in sport. You can interpolate it out. I think the company that does it does a brilliant job of presenting to consumers the need for balance and recovery against expression, physical training. They do a phenomenal job of that, and that's where that product needs to be. GPS monitors, there's half a dozen of those companies in the space now. They have a 2-meter error coefficient. So when we're talking about, say, an NFL lineman, their whole life is in that 2-meter box. So the data coming off that could not fuel a load algorithm to give artificial intelligence the opportunity to say, hey, this guy is at risk of injury. So if I wanted to go into ChatGPT right now, maybe someone can do this. What sensors do we need to reduce injury? What do those need to look like? Where are they worn on the body? I am critically interested in foot-ground interaction right now, Adam, because of the amount of non-contact ACL injuries is one of the highest drains of resources in the world of sport are these non-contact ACL injuries. It's a pandemic we have going on. 15% of all soccer players are going to suffer an ACL injury. You put those numbers against contracts, it's stunning. So foot ground interactive sensors are something I'm super interested in. Physiological response to maybe patch-worn technologies as opposed to plastic box in noisy environments. We have to get more accurate data to fuel these algorithms and artificial intelligence. And look, AI is going to be a significant player in our industry. There is no question. But when it comes down to, am I preventing injury? Am I improving performance? Not yet. Not yet.
And stay tuned for next time when we go over how to get more accurate data.
Yeah, exactly. And for
Gary,
1995, we'll have we'll have an infomercial that we can throw on the end here. No, and it's interesting from for your perspective too. I mean, from data sets coming off FlexPro Grip, with what you're getting there, where does that go currently inside of organizations? Are you seeing that housed and hung onto like it's gold inside of the athletic training modules, or you're seeing strength coaches go, hey, maybe you need 3 sets of 10 on this? Where do you see most of the application right now?
Great question. Appreciate you asking it. Now, some of it is so org dependent or university dependent or facility dependent, because you think about the levels that we're implemented at, and it goes from a 10-year-old that got the device with their father just because that kid wants to play baseball for a long time and hopefully get better, all the way up to Cy Young Award winners. And the Cy Young Award winner might not necessarily care about getting better. The Cy Young Award winner just wants to monitor where he is at and make sure that he can perform every time he is supposed to. Thinking about the more traditional wearables, right? What is my steady state, and just making sure that I maintain it, trying to reduce all the noise. And there's some organizations that we work with that literally just want to use FlexPro Grip as an extension of what they're doing in the weight room. So it is long-term monitoring just to see if an individual is getting stronger. Now that there are others that are using it more from a readiness perspective, where they're using it to make truly informed decisions for how do I want to structure my bullpen. Much what you were saying with your team back in Taiwan, it wasn't that because an individual scored a certain way on FlexPro Grip, it means that they are all of a sudden going to be the number 1 man out of the bullpen or the number 3 man out of the bullpen. More what it means is, how important is it that we win this game, and how long of a leash do we want to give this individual?
And that's normally the thinking, that's the entirety of the thinking pitching coaches have going into a game, right? It's all about now. It's all about now. And that kind of flies in the face from load management and everything else. But I hear you. Yeah, it's some of those short thoughts are the way they think. And it's not that you want to change that. It's like, how do you support that? Right? It's like,
exactly
giving them that. Are we giving them the right numbers they need to see to say, okay, he looks like he's got great strength today from the measurements we're getting. So therefore we think we can, what that has shown for him historically is we might get 3 innings out of him today, with just the other part of this too, which I hate, the linearity of pitch counts and innings. Like, some teams still use innings counts as an indication of fatigue over the course of a season. An inning can be 3, it can be 33 pitches. Come on. So it's pitch distribution, I think, has a load qualitative variable that needs to be understood. And the ability for that to measure that as baseline on a day-to-day basis is where part of your magic lies, I think, is to be able to see that.
So you bring up a really interesting point there, and specifically with FlexPro Grip and how it can kind of play into that specific load of each pitch. I know you've done some research on it. You've presented a few topics of when we look at a pitch count or they load on a pitcher individually, that a certain pitch might be more stressful for an individual. That example you gave earlier with your big lefty, cutters were particularly stressful for this individual. One of the things that we have research coming out on down the line, we've taken the data in already at this point, and we're talking about it at the preliminary stages, is that the muscles that control our finger flexors, so the same muscles that are optimally positioned to offload stress at the UCL, can't produce as much force when our forearm is in a supinated position as opposed to in a pronated or neutral position, thinking about more of a traditional fastball
Yeah.
release.
Yeah.
So where or why does that matter? Breaking pitches are thrown out of increased supination versus a traditional fastball or changeup, pitches that are seen as less stressful. Granted, the research has said for the past, like the modern research has said that for the past 10 years, probably, fastballs are actually more dangerous. And that's just because total torque is higher on the fastball. Now, where we would kind of throw this thing completely in reverse, back to all those little league coaches or the original researchers back in the early 90s that said breaking balls are the devil. We're not going to say breaking balls are the devil, but what we would say, although they might not be as high on the raw torque perspective, the elbow, when the forearm is in supination, is not as well positioned to handle the torque. Now, where this goes to the individual level is what we have also seen is that disparity between that neutral or pronated position versus the supinated position is less when we can classify a pitcher as a biased supinator. So you go back to what you were saying
Yeah.
as
Yeah.
assessing the individual. If that individual's movement signature biases supination and they've been in that supinated position or throwing supinated base pitches for their entire life, they might not show as much disparity in that ratio as somebody who can be classified as a pronator or somebody that throws, in our baseball sense, the high ride fastball, arm side changeups, versus what we're seeing now with sinker slider guys or guys with
Yeah.
lower spin efficiencies.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking now. Like, okay, so you get that number, you get those markers. Now you're giving me a qualitative measure of load by pitch is almost what's going on here. I would like to look at data in terms of strength at pronation, at supination, and understand that disparity and see what that looks like. And would that give me my immediate thoughts, which will be, I'll think, stupid in a week because that's the way my head works. My initial thought is that that disparity there could give us the indication of, yeah, this is a slider-based pitcher. He's got an effective slider. We can increase that distribution of that pitch because of the framework we've got to work with, because of we know the parameters of load, what he can accept and what's acceptable. And it'll also, I think there would be some data there that could directly correlate to how the fastball looks against the slider as well. There's going to be data sets there that I think, because you're breaking it down at such a level of accuracy and importance there, I think we've got to collect a lot of data right now on what you're doing specifically, because we don't know, but there's going to be, as we look at metadata and analysis and understand injuries, soreness, all those pathways, all that data you're collecting, Adam, I think is going to be insightful over time. There's going to be some metric that is this number and this number, some average, something that is going to give risk indication of injury, but it's also going to give performance indication. To your point, readiness, right? Readiness is a big thing we need to understand.
Yes, we talk about it all the time. We know one thing for sure with FlexPro Grip. We can claim a bunch of things, and trust me, we do. We believe in the product, we believe in the system that we've created wholeheartedly. But the one thing we know for sure is we are collecting data that has never previously existed. So,
Exactly.
with that, we are going to be able to not necessarily provide answers, but we are going to give information for people that are in your position or that are in organizations or at colleges to find answers for specific problems that they have.
I love it. Yeah, understanding the weak link in the chain is the UCL, coming off everything that you've done relative to supporting and understanding the structures of the forearm that are going to support the continual stretch and expression of this single ligament, right? It's like, my God, can you cure the pandemic is the question, right? I think this is a big part of the solution. We don't know if it's all of the solution, but I think it's certainly a big part of it. I tend to look at a lot of injury from and I always wondered this in strength and conditioning, why do we train the arm in compressed states when all the time it's extended, and it's like the point where something is going to, the mechanism where something is going to pop, it's in full extension. It's at the point where we got full layback and full exposure of the UCL, or if it's at the shoulder girdle, it's at a point in time, whether it's a rotator cuff, labrum based, where we're outside of the normal range. It's always outside of those normal ranges that the injuries occur. There's a combination kind of interrelated systems relative to even cognitive state that could have brought that about, because we haven't dove deep enough into this yet. We need to get that data. And I think where teams are going in 5 years' time, I think you're going to have a repository of elbow-based measurements and data sets around the forearm and the elbow specifically, that like we could dive into another whole podcast about the value of arm strength in hitters, right? How critical that is. Many people taught me that, and it was like, wow, I didn't see grip strength as a major issue, but yeah, now I see it. So yeah, there could be, I think the data you're collecting is going to be mined, and it's going to be formidable. It's going to be disruptive to the way we look at players' arms. There's no question.
I hate to finally do this, but I have to put the line in the sand and call it quits on this talk. And trust me, I'm not doing this for me. I'm doing this because I know you have a meeting that you have to get to. So thank you for being gracious enough to spend all this time with us. I think we did set a record, or we're at least close to potentially the longest episode of the Layback Podcast.
Felt like I was talking to you for felt like one of our normal conversations, Adam.
Exactly, except the difference is we had this one over Zoom instead of over a bowl of orange chicken at
PF Chang's. Yeah, exactly. Well, mate, it was great. Thank you for having me on. I mean, this is fun. I love these conversations because I learn things, and you never know where it's going to go, and I always learn something.
Of course, Gary, this was a blast. One last question. Is there a way people can follow what you're doing or reach out or anything like that?
Sure. LinkedIn is probably where most people find me, and I get calls out of the blue a lot of times from there. You find me on LinkedIn. I think it's Strength Coach 21, I think is my handle on LinkedIn. You can find me. It's Gary at McCoyperformance.com. If you got a question, want to shoot over an email to me. Caught me at a good time. I'm about to get involved in some more heavier stuff, but I've kind of got enough of a quiet period here during spring training that I can have some discussions, which is fun.
This was great, man. I really appreciate the time, Gary. And of course, to the listeners, we appreciate you laying back with us.